Guys, I need your help. I need you to help me make a huge decision. I'm looking to get a new camera in the near future. And coming from someone who is still using a camera that came out in 2016, it's kind of a huge deal for me. I'm not going to take this decision lightly, and I really don't want to make a mistake here because this is probably going to be my camera for at least the next 5 years or so. I absolutely do not want to be buying cameras every couple years, and a lot of people do that. A lot of people continuously buy the newest, latest camera out there, but that's not me. That's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and I just don't want to be wasting my time doing all that. So I want to make sure I'm making the right decision, and I'm sure a lot of you are in the same boat as me who are looking to get a new camera as well. So why don't we go on this journey together? So I know there are a ton of cameras out there, lots of different brands, lots of different companies, lots of cool new cameras that came out in the past year or so, but I will be sticking with the Sony ecosystem. And I don't think I want to go with a full-out hardcore cinema camera. Those things cost a ton of money and it's really not in my budget right now. So that helped me narrow it down to two cameras. The first is a camera that everyone seems to have been waiting for what seems like forever, and that is the Sony A7S III. It's a fantastic camera that's in a more traditional mirrorless camera body, and it just absolutely crushes it when it comes to video quality. And the contender is the Sony FX3, something that Sony considers to be a part of their cinema line, although it's a little bit more of a budget cinema camera. Now, after the FX3 was announced and released, everyone started absolutely freaking out and losing their minds because they thought it was basically the same camera, or because they thought the A7S III was now useless because they thought the FX3 was slightly better. So there were lots of people who thought this camera was, nothing new, nothing different, just the same old camera as A7S III, just in a different body, and there are others who think this just isn't a cinema camera at all. So with all the confusion here, there's lots to look at, lots to digest, and although at face value, these two cameras seem like they could be the same camera, but once you look a little bit closer, you'll actually notice there are quite a few differences between the two cameras, which will make the decision a little bit harder to make. So before we dive deeper into this, why don't you drop me a comment down below letting me know which camera you think is a better camera right now. Then, after we dive deeper into everything, I want you to drop me another comment letting me know what you think after hearing all there is to know about both of these cameras. Alright, with that, let's get right to the deets. Did I just say deets? Anyway, let's get to the details. Alright, so I'm going to read off the specs here to you because I really don't want to fumble this around and jumble it all up. So, these two cameras actually have the exact same specs, both featuring the same second generation 12 megapixel full frame LUTs More R BSI CMOS sensor, dual Bions XR image processors, 759-point fast hybrid autofocus, UHD 4K 120p video recording, 10-bit 422 internal recording, 16-bit raw output, HLG, S-Log2 and S-Log3 gammas, 5-axis in-body image stabilization, dual CF Express Type A and SD slots, full-size HDMI ports, and fully articulating LCD screens. So as you can see, both of these cameras are absolutely fantastic, and you get pretty much the same video quality out of both of them. So this is basically why everybody was saying these cameras are almost identical. And why did Sony even bother dropping the FX3, or why did they make the A7S III in the first place? Well, with what we're going to go into next, this is where you're going to start seeing where the differences actually are. So for the pricing on these bad boys, the FX3 comes in at $38.98 US, and the Sony A7S III comes in at $34.98. That's a difference of about $400. And in Canada, where I'm located, the FX3 starts at $49.99, while the Sony A7S III comes in at $47.98. That's only a difference of $200. So for all my American friends out there, the biggest question is it worth spending the extra $400 to get the FX3 over the A7S III? And for all my fellow Canadians, we actually have an easier choice of deciding between spending an extra $200 between these two cameras. So to help determine all of that, first we're going to look at what these two cameras actually come with. So the A7S III comes with the camera body itself, a USB-A to USB-C cable, a camera strap, a battery charger, an FZ100 battery, and a cord and port protector that mounts near the ports to help make anything plugged in more secure. On the other hand, the Sony FX3 comes with the camera body itself, a USB-A to USB-C cable, an FZ100 battery, a battery charger, and a top handle with a mount for a microphone, a 3.5mm jack, and 2 XLR inputs. Now that is where quite the difference is. Now, if you don't know what XLR inputs are, then you can just stop this video right here. Thank you for coming. You'll do absolutely fine with the A7S III. You don't have to watch any further because the FX3 is probably not for you. I'm just kidding. No, please don't go. I'll tell you what XLR is for. Don't go anywhere, okay? It's to plug in higher end, more professional level cameras that have the XLR connector. So the top handle actually has all these inputs and connectors in there with buttons and switches that'll help control microphones that are plugged in through these XLR inputs. Now it also does have the 3.5mm jack on there as well, which also can be controlled all through this top handle. So this feature alone shows that this camera is actually more geared towards video shooters, especially in a more professional environment. And the fact that all of this is built into a top handle that just connects to the top of the camera, that just screams video shooter to me. As you may know, I rigged up my current camera, the Sony A7S III, by adding a cage that allows me to add accessories to it, where I added my top handle, a side handle, a monitor mount with a field monitor attached to it, and more. So by coming with this nice top handle and everything else I'm about to talk about in the next section, you'll see how this camera out of the box comes more ready to be set up for a cinema rig. And that brings us to the form factor. The A7S III has pretty much the same body as the A7S II, which is basically a bigger and clunkier version of the A6000 series cameras. And the FX3 is actually more reminiscent of the A6000 series camera bodies, but it is bigger and heavier. Now, the A7S III is actually on the bigger side, but it is still portable enough to bring around with you and easily slip into your bags. And on the flip side, the FX3 is smaller and more compact, although it does weigh just about the same as the A7S III. That being said, although it is more compact and smaller than the A7S III, the FX3 actually has a slightly bigger hand grip that appears to come out and extend further than on the A7S III, so this makes it easier to grab and grip, especially if you have bigger hands. And although they both do feature the same flip-out screen, the screen on the FX3 actually has a little notch cut out, which makes it easier for your thumb or your finger to stick in there to be able to flip the screen out easily. And in terms of mounting threads, the A7S III only has 2 1/4-inch 20th mounting threads on it, while the FX3 has 5, plus an additional 3 on the top handle. Now keep in mind, when you do mount the top handle to the body, it actually is taking up 2 of those threads, so you don't have a combined 8 at any one time, you'll have a total maximum of 6 at any one time. Like I mentioned earlier, this is one of those main things that really shows me this camera is meant for serious video shooters. With the A7S III, you have no choice but to buy a cage if you want to rig that thing out. But with the FX3, you don't have to buy a cage. It has all these mounts all over the camera body, so you can basically build it out the way you want to without having to buy any additional cages. So if you were interested in getting the A7S III and you did want to make it more of a cinema style rig build out, you'd be looking at spending about $50 if you wanted to buy a cage on the cheaper side. But that's without a top handle, not to mention a system to plug in XLR style inputs. So if you were a more serious video shooter who wanted to rig out your camera, if you got the A7S III and it started at $34.98, you then have to add $50 for the cage, as well as around $20 for a top handle. So the price of this altogether is still cheaper than the cost of the FX3, but if you were interested in the XLR style inputs, that is where the cost would start to skyrocket. Sony does offer an accessory that you would have to grab, which is the XLR K3M adapter, but this goes for about $600 US. Granted, this does come with a shotgun microphone, but you may already have a microphone or you may want a different one, so you have no choice but to spend $600 to get this attachment. In my eyes, that's quite a hefty price tag to pay just to be able to add XLR inputs. So now if we look at our grand total for the A7S III with a cage, a top handle, and the XLR adapter, we're looking at $4150, which is more than the cost of the FX3. So not only does it cost more, you have to add all these things on top of it, when with the FX3, it all comes bundled in this nice little package. And if you want to recap that for my fellow Canadians as well, to add a cage to the Sony A7S III is going to cost about $60 to $70, and then for a top handle it's going to be about $25 to $30, and then the XLR K3M adapter costs about $700 or $750, so that'll all come to a grand total of $5,600, which is way more than the cost of the FX3. So as you can see, because there's less of a price difference between the two models for Canadians, it is way more worth it to get the FX3 if you are interested in all those aspects of filmmaking. And even for all you Americans out there, I still feel like if you're interested in all those awesome video aspects and video shooting aspects of using either of these two cameras, it's starting to look like a bit of a no-brainer which camera is the better option for you. But if you're still not decided, let's go over a few more things to help you make that decision. Alright, that brings us to the extra features. The A7S III comes with a viewfinder, like most DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, and like most cameras in Sony's Alpha lineup. On the other hand, the FX3 does not have one. Now, I know a lot of people were upset about this as well, but let's be honest, if you are getting this camera, you're most likely planning on rigging it up, and you're most likely going to be using it with an external monitor anyway. And you could also buy an external viewfinder and attach it on there as well if you really want to go that route, but it's totally not necessary, especially if you use a bigger external monitor. But if you are more of a hybrid shooter, like a lot of people are, a lot of people like to take a lot of photos and stills as well and only have one main camera to do both, then this could be a deal breaker for you, and the A7S III will probably be a better camera for you. I know you can very easily take photos by looking at the back of the camera at the LCD screen, but as somebody who started out with photography and does take a lot of photos as well, I can tell you that at least 75% of the time, I actually do look through the viewfinder when I'm taking photos. So keep that in mind because like I said, if this is your only camera, that could be a bit more of a deal breaker for you. But without the viewfinder, that actually allows the top handle to be mounted directly on top of the FX3. So unlike on the A7S III, the viewfinder is on top of the camera there, so it would make it impossible to actually mount the top handle directly on top of that camera. That's why you have to buy a cage for a camera like the A7S III. Next, the FX3 has 6 custom buttons, including an additional record button on the front bottom of the camera. So this will enable you to program certain settings or features that you want to easily and quickly access without having to fumble through the menu system. On the other hand, the A7S III only has 3 custom buttons, and it doesn't feature a record button on the front of the camera. This might seem like a small thing to be worrying about, but trust me, if you're on the other side of the camera and you're fumbling around to hit that record button, sometimes it can be quite challenging to be reaching around to get that normal record button that's at the back or top of the camera. Next, the FX3 has tally lights. That's right, tally lights. This is amazing, and it's honestly like probably one of the best additional features that this camera has. So tally lights actually let you see when you are recording. So there are actually 3 of them, one at the back, one at the top, and one at the front of the camera. So at any which point in which you are around the camera, if you're behind the camera, if you're in front of it, you'll always know when you are recording. I can't tell you how many times I've run into the issue of not knowing if I was recording. Sometimes you forget, sometimes you're just not sure, and having to get up and go all the way around to the back of the camera to always see if you're recording is something that just wastes time and is a huge pain in the butt. So having these tally lights is a very welcome addition. The A7S III completely lacks this feature, so that's a huge win for the FX3. The FX3 also has a zoom rocker or lever, which enables Sony's clear image zoom, which is a huge bonus as well. I believe this feature is built into most of Sony's recent cameras, including the A7S III, but you have to access it through a menu system or potentially by adding it to one of the custom buttons. But to control the actual zoom itself, you have to either use the buttons on the back of the camera or one of the other wheels, so this won't get you a nice smooth zooming in and out. So with this zoom rocker, it's kind of reminiscent of those old school video cameras that had just a little zoom thing on it. So you would just like slide it in one direction and it would zoom in, slide it the other way and it zooms out. But the harder or softer you do it dictates how fast or slowly it zooms in, and it also does it with this whole smooth transition. So it's a fantastic feature to have, and it's very welcome on the FX3. And finally, a feature, or rather something that comes built into the camera that is worth discussing, which takes us to the next section, and that is the overheating and cooling. The FX3 has an internal fan to keep it cool, while the A7S III does not. Overheating can be quite an issue for a lot of modern cameras today, and this is no different for Sony cameras, and trust me, I know all about that, having the Sony A6300. That thing overheats like crazy, and within 10 to 15 minutes, that thing overheats and has to shut down. So when Sony released the A7S III, they actually tried to address a lot of these issues, but I'm not sure if they entirely addressed all of it. Apparently, you can record for about 60 minutes on the A7S III, and in some real world tests, people actually were able to get anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes in a controlled indoor environment. But when they went outdoor in the heat, that's when things were different. In the heat of a summer day when outdoors, a lot of people, when conducting their tests, were only able to get between 25 and 30 minutes of recording time before it overheated. So that's quite a difference from what Sony is saying, that it can record 60 minutes at a time. So in reality, the overheating issues were only somewhat addressed. I'm not sure if Sony released an update for their firmware, but that is still quite a big concern, especially for myself. Like I mentioned before, my camera overheats all the time, and I was able to address some of these issues by rigging out the camera and adding external batteries. So I was able to get my record time from about 10 minutes to about 15 to 20, but I'm still dealing with overheating issues every single time I record. And that's all in an indoor environment. I haven't been out in a while in the heat to shoot, but I can almost guarantee that the camera wouldn't last as long if it was very hot outside. So if I'm going to be getting a new camera, I don't want to have to think about or worry about overheating at all, period. Call it a bit of overheating PTSD if you will, but that's something I just absolutely do not want to have to think about. So with the FX3's built-in fan, it seems like this won't be an issue at all. Apparently, there's no record limit when shooting in 4K at 60p, so it seems like that is just a complete non-issue at the moment. Well, that was a ton of information to get through, a lot of things to consider when deciding between a new camera, and specifically these two cameras, the A7S III and the FX3. And after discussing all these different points, I think it only makes sense to break it down to these two scenarios right here. If you're more of a hybrid shooter, and you're going to be shooting just as many photos as you do videos, then the Sony A7S III is probably the better camera for you. Chances are you won't necessarily want to be rigging out your camera, especially because it probably makes it heavier, makes it harder to shoot photos because it makes it kind of awkward if you want to be shooting in different orientations. So all this will help you save some money, and with the built-in viewfinder, it just becomes the obvious choice, especially if it's going to be your only camera. But if you're more of a video shooter, and especially at a more professional level, then the FX3 seems like a clear winner to me. With not needing to buy a separate cage, to coming with the top handle with the XLR inputs, to having a ton of 1/4 inch 20 threads all over the camera to help accessorize it and rig it out, as well as the fan to virtually get rid of any overheating issues, the FX3 seems like the best choice if you are a more serious video shooter who doesn't want to fork over a lot more money for an actual serious, beefier cinema camera. At the end of the day, the FX3 is still missing some features that are pretty common in a lot of cinema cameras, like not having built-in NDs, using shutter speed instead of shutter angle, no timecode or DCI 4K, and the lack of true 24 frames per second. So if you're still looking for a true cinema camera, neither of these two cameras are probably the option for you. But all in all, both of these cameras are amazing and fantastic for any level of video shooter, so either choice will be the right one for you, depending on the scenario that you fall into. Well, it seems like this has helped me make my decision. I think I will be getting the Sony FX3 once I save up a little bit more money for it. It's not exactly cheap here in Canada, but I think it is something that will be worthwhile, that will help take me into the next 5 years of my career. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me. I hope this helped you also make a decision if you are in the market for a new camera. And like I said, I think you'll be happy either way with whichever camera of these two you choose. And with that, if you like this video, make sure to hit that like button down below. And if you want to see more videos like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. As always, I'm Perri. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya.